Today we are examining the collapse of City to City, South Africa's state-owned intercity bus service. This is not a story about market competition or changing consumer preferences. This is a forensic analysis of how a government-protected monopoly managed to fail despite having every structural advantage. The scene is the N1 highway outside Polokwane. 2 in the morning, a city-to-city bus sits on the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. Passengers stand on the roadside in the cold. No rescue bus has arrived. No communication from the company. Just stranded travelers who paid for transportation and received abandonment instead.
We've been calling since midnight. They're not answering our phones. I'm going to suffer cost when I'm given another date to appear. I have to book another bus with my expenses and go back to PE again.
This model works in many countries. State-owned bus services function effectively across Europe, Asia, and parts of Africa. In South Africa, it produced a service that passengers actively avoided when alternatives existed. The user experience data is unambiguous. Hello Peter, a South African consumer complaint platform, accumulated extensive documentation of city-to-city failures. Buses that never arrived. 6-hour delays on highways with no mechanical support. Refund requests ignored or denied. Drivers abandoning routes mid-journey. The phrase moving coffins appeared repeatedly in customer reviews, reflecting not just dissatisfaction but genuine fear of using the service. This was not isolated feedback. This was a pattern consistent across years and routes. The complaints did not describe occasional service failures. They described systemic operational collapse. The operational reality behind these failures follows a predictable pattern.
Friday at 6 p.m. that you will be receiving half your salary on Monday when you're expecting to be paid for. There are debit orders, there are family members that you support, and we all know January is a very hard month and you literally look forward to that payday. So I must say it is quite hard.
Lately, the company has been struggling to pay salaries on time, culminating in the current predicament. The financial situation is so bad, the company is unable to tell the workers when the other half of their salaries will be paid. Workers say it all comes as no surprise, as mismanagement and corruption is rife at the state company.
Let me just correct a few notions. The PRASA actually does have money. What happened, unfortunately, at Autopacks was a case of maladministration, if I can call it that. We had loaned Autopacks last month at the end of March 50 million rands, and that was enough money for the salaries to be paid.
Fleet maintenance requires consistent investment. Buses need regular servicing, parts replacement, and systematic upkeep. When a company faces financial pressure, maintenance is often the first cost to be deferred. The logic seems sound in the short term. Delaying a service interval saves immediate cash, but deferred maintenance creates a compounding problem. Buses break down more frequently. Breakdowns cause delays and cancellations. Delays and cancellations drive away customers. Lost customers mean reduced revenue. Reduced revenue increases financial pressure, which leads to more deferred maintenance. This is the maintenance debt spiral, and City to City was deep into it by the late 2010s. The numbers tell the story with clarity. By 2020, Autopacks was technically insolvent.
Autopacks, the wholly owned bus subsidiary of PRASA, operating the City to City and Translux brands, has faced operational and financial challenges for a while now. These have culminated in a serious cash flow challenge, resulting in the recent inability to pay employees their full salaries. The parent of Autopacks, PRASA, the shareholder, ministry, and the Department of Transport are working on a long-term plan to turn the business around in a difficult economic environment.
The company could not meet payroll for over 1,000 employees without emergency government intervention. This was not a temporary cash flow problem. This was structural insolvency. Liabilities exceeded assets. Operating costs exceeded revenue. The entity was economically non-viable. The data shows a massive disconnect between operational capacity and market demand. Just like our own internal audit shows that 97.3% of the people watching this investigation have not subscribed yet. We need that 2.7% support to keep opening these files. The Autopacks numbers, however, show a gap that cannot be fixed with subscription appeals or temporary bailouts. The underlying business model had failed. And here is where the analysis becomes more complex. Because City to City was not competing on a level field. It had structural advantages that no private competitor could access. And it still failed. In 2018, the Competition Commission of South Africa initiated an investigation into anti-competitive practices at Park Station in Johannesburg. Park Station is the central intercity bus terminal. It is the primary departure and arrival point for long-distance bus services in South Africa's economic hub. Control of Park Station means control of market access. The investigation revealed that PRASA, the state entity that owns Autopacks and therefore City to City, was using its control of Park Station to give its own buses exclusive advantages. City to City received loading bays at no cost. The company was provided office space rent-free. Private competitors were either denied access entirely or charged substantial fees for inferior facilities. This is textbook anti-competitive behavior. A state-owned monopoly using control of critical infrastructure to disadvantage private competitors. The Competition Commission documented these practices in detail. The findings were not ambiguous. PRASA was rigging the market in favor of City to City, and City to City was still losing money. Think about that structural absurdity. A bus company with zero rent costs at the country's most valuable terminal. A company with government subsidies. A company with regulatory protection. And it could not generate enough revenue to pay its employees. This reveals the depth of the operational failure. The problem was not market competition. The problem was not pricing pressure from private operators. The problem was that City to City could not execute basic bus service even when the government removed every competitive obstacle. Private operators like Intercape were paying rent and fees at Park Station and still operating profitably. They maintained their fleets. They ran on schedule. They processed refunds. They competed on service quality and reliability. And they were being systematically blocked from the best terminal access to protect a state-owned competitor that was failing anyway. The contrast with Greyhound is instructive. Greyhound, a private luxury bus operator, closed operations in February 2021 due to financial constraints.
It's an end of an era. The company, which has operated for almost 40 years, is closing its operations due to financial woes.
It's said that I lost my job at this company. This was one of the best companies to work for. This was not the right time for us as employees because we did not have time to prepare for this.
Passengers also expressed regret that Greyhound was closing its doors.
I'm very sad about it. I've used Greyhound for many years, traveling from Joburg to Cape Town, from Cape Town to Joburg, Durban to Cape Town. I've been traveling like all around.
This was during the COVID pandemic when travel demand collapsed. The closure was presented as permanent. The brand appeared dead. Then in 2022, Greyhound was acquired by new ownership and relaunched. The service resumed. The fleet was refurbished. The company operates today. A private company died, was purchased, and successfully resurrected because the new owners saw viable business fundamentals. City to City did not close. It entered what can only be described as a zombie state. The service continues sporadically. Government bailouts keep it technically operational, but it is not a functioning business. It is a subsidized entity that continues to exist because state ownership prevents actual liquidation. This reveals a critical distinction between private failure and state failure. When a private company becomes insolvent, creditors force liquidation. Assets are sold. The brand either dies or is acquired and restructured. When a state-owned entity becomes insolvent, the government can simply continue funding it. There is no forced liquidation. There is no market discipline. The entity persists in a state of permanent dysfunction, consuming public resources without delivering functional service. And while City to City was failing despite government protection, another transport mode was thriving. The minibus taxi industry, unsubsidized, unprotected, often operating in regulatory gray areas, and absolutely dominating the intercity passenger transport market. Taxis run frequently. They leave when full rather than on fixed schedules. They are faster because they make fewer stops. They are more accessible because they operate from multiple locations rather than centralized terminals. And critically, they show up. Passengers trust that a taxi will actually complete the journey. City to City could not compete with this. Not because taxis were subsidized or protected, but because taxis delivered what passengers needed: reliable transportation at competitive prices. The most basic service requirement. The broader pattern is significant. Across South Africa, state-owned enterprises have demonstrated consistent patterns of operational failure. Eskom cannot reliably generate electricity. Transnet cannot efficiently move freight. South African Airways required repeated bailouts before eventual liquidation. And City to City cannot run buses on schedule. The common element is not sector-specific. It is structural. State ownership combined with political interference, union pressures, and lack of market discipline creates entities that are insulated from the consequences of poor performance. Management underperformance does not result in bankruptcy. It results in bailouts. Operational failures do not result in closure. They result in excuses. City to City had every advantage: subsidies, rent-free terminals, protection from competition, and it could not execute the basic function of moving passengers from point A to point B reliably. The maintenance debt spiral was not inevitable. The fleet deterioration was not unavoidable. The service failures were not the result of market forces beyond the company's control. They were the result of management failures, operational incompetence, and the absence of accountability that comes with state ownership. When a private company performs this poorly, it dies. When a state company performs this poorly, it receives a bailout and continues operating. The Competition Commission findings are particularly damning because they demonstrate that even with the market rigged in its favor, City to City could not succeed. The anti-competitive practices at Park Station were not minor infractions. They were systematic efforts to exclude private competitors and give the state operator exclusive advantages. And those advantages were insufficient to overcome the fundamental operational dysfunction. The buses still broke down. The schedule still failed. The customers still fled to taxis. The revenue still fell short of costs. The insolvency still occurred. This is the autopsy. The cause of death was not market competition. City to City died because state ownership created an entity incapable of competing even when competition was artificially suppressed. The moving coffins were not a maintenance problem. They were a symptom of an organization that faced no meaningful consequences for failure. Private operators maintained their fleets because failure to do so meant bankruptcy. City to City deferred maintenance because failure simply meant requesting another government bailout. The incentive structures were fundamentally broken, and broken incentives produce broken organizations. The passengers stranded at 2 in the morning on the N1 were not victims of market forces or budget constraints. They were victims of an organizational structure that prioritized political considerations over operational competence. A structure that allowed management to fail repeatedly without consequences. A structure that could not be fixed because the fundamental problem was the structure itself. City to City exists today in name. Buses occasionally run. Some routes still operate. But the entity is not a functional business. It is a state-funded shell that consumes public resources while delivering substandard service to a shrinking customer base. The moving coffins are still on the road. The maintenance is still deferred. The bailouts are still requested. And the passengers who have alternatives are choosing them. Because when a service fails you at 2 in the morning on a dark highway, you do not give it a second chance. You find transport that actually works. This has been SA Autopsies. The next investigation examines another state entity that promised service and delivered dysfunction. We will continue documenting these failures because understanding why they occur is the first step toward demanding accountability. The file remains open.